Hey, this is LOA Today, the Law of Attraction show. Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and Joel Elston here. Thursday, September 8th, 2016. And Joel, just a few days back, got back from his annual trip to his bench in Florida, the one that he wrote the book about. And Joel, I saw some of your posts on Facebook. You obviously had another great trip.
I did, Walt. Thank you. It's great to be back. And as I was saying before we went on the air, I was about 5 hours ahead of the hurricane getting out of Florida. So, it worked, an exceptional trip. But every year, often multiple times a year, but one specific date for sure I go back is, as many people know who I have heard the show before, read my book, The Bench. My son TJ on August 29th of 2014 was killed in a car accident. And I had the bench being for the previous 20 years of my life had been just sort of the place that I went to get guidance, and I didn't realize I was doing that for years, but it was sort of the culmination of all the stuff I'd been through in my addiction, and the bench was a retreat place for me. And eventually it became where I laid TJ's remains, because it was he loved the place, I loved the place, so we now my guaranteed annual trip, where there may be others, is on the anniversary of the date of his death, not to celebrate, obviously to celebrate his life, not his death. Mm-hmm. He brought an incredible amount of joy to my life, and
sure.
that's what I focus on in all of this, is what he brought to my life. But every time I make one of these trips, it feels like, first of all, I'm energized, I'm recharged, but I have more and more clarity as I go. Mm. And this trip was no different. I have, as you know, the weekly update for those that listen to us every week, of my news blackout / reprogramming of my brain. This trip was a great opportunity to sit on the bench and continue that reprogramming. It seemed to even be a little more intense while I was able to do it.
Specifically, what do you mean intense? What was intense about it?
Because the emotion attached to the trip, or the feeling of that incredible feeling I get when I'm at the bench, now I'm able to really get more intensely involved in this process of reprogramming of my brain, of the law of attraction. And something that I was listening to while I was on the bench, we're doing this without a script, obviously. So you're going to be learning this as I'm talking about it. But one of the awakenings I had was, one of the people I was listening to said, what gets lost in the term of the law of attraction is we think we're attracting something, and you wanting on a really deep level is what brings it. And the gentleman I was listening to said, that's where a lot of people miss the boat. You create you find out what you want to attract in your life, and then you create the environment mentally for it to arrive. So instead of attracting, you're creating. And it really, I don't know why that really hit home with me, because we have always talked about how you can want it too much, and you actually, by wanting it too much, you push it away. And the idea that creating the environment and letting go of the outcome of how you get there is such an important way of looking at it. And
it is.
There's a gentleman, Dr. Joe DiPenzia, who's written several books, and he talks about when he was in a severe bicycle wreck, how he literally would lay in bed every day and rebuild his vertebrae mentally. Mm. And he would name the chemicals necessary to come to that his body needed to produce to redo the bone, and he did this. And he talks about it in his books in great detail, how he created the environment for his body to heal, despite doctors telling him this was an impossible task. Mm. And it goes further into how that translates to the rest of his life, and how he was able to, in other parts of his life, really start using that idea of creating the environment, and then what you create mentally or deep emotional attachment, and I'm going somewhere with the emotional part here, is what eventually the universe hates a vacuum. It fills that. And so when I said I felt it very intensely at the bench this time, because there's so much emotion attached to it, a positive state of emotion, and not just positive thinking, but a very uplifted, in the right mindset, is when you can most effectively create these things mentally that you need. Mm-hmm. And that's where the power exists. The power exists there's a gentleman, Bruce Lipton. He's another doctor, great guy. And he's written several books, well, maybe two. Unleashing the Power of Consciousness is one of them, The Biology of Belief. And it really goes into the concept of how the biology of the law of attraction, the biology of the law, how we create these events in our life. And it's fascinating that identical DNA, and he explains this much better than I'm going to be able to do it, but identical,
right.
Identical DNA subjected to different environments totally produce something totally separate. I mean, it's amazing that DNA that is subjected to different environments, and he was one of the first working on the stem cell project 40 years ago. And he realized that when they took a stem cell or that level of DNA and they put it in a certain environment, it really turned into muscle, and then altered the environment and it turned into bone, and altered the environment again and it turned into skin or hair.
Right.
And this idea that the DNA, which science tells us today is what drives everything, is not accurate as much as the environment that the DNA exists in. And that's where the law of attraction goes. So I don't want to get way out where we're confusing the audience. We're getting too far there. But I'm loving how mentally I'm starting to see a science behind this mentally. And so as I was sitting on the bench, I could feel all this and see it and envision it even more clearly. And this trip just sort of continues this several week, couple of month now awakening, and further diving into the law of attraction for me and all of the science attached to it. It's really been a fascinating week.
That's fantastic. That's really good. I like the idea, too, of creating as the basis for the law of attraction. I totally agree with that. The thing I always think about when I'm trying to consider the question of why is it that sometimes we don't seem to attract what it is we're trying to attract, I always go back to the Abraham Hicks model, which is that it's like a two-ended stick. One stick is the thing you're trying to attract. The other end is the absence of the thing that you're trying to attract. And that when we're failing to attract, it's because we think we're focusing on the things end, but we're actually focusing on the absence of thing end. When you're creating, you really can't create by focusing on the absence of the thing. There's not a way to do that. So it makes a lot of sense to me that creation is where we want to focus our attention, because that's where we're going to actually consistently produce the result we're looking for. Whereas when we're not thinking of it in terms of creation, we're much more prone to look at that absence end of the stick rather than the thing end.
Absolutely. And that's sort of where I think most of our audience will get stuck, or most of the people that I know that want to try to use the law of attraction in a positive manner in their life sort of get stuck at. It's hard to not focus. When you focus on what you're lacking, no matter how you try to phrase that in your mind, you are creating the effect of lack.
Right.
By sitting there and literally creating the abundance that you want, you look at that. That's how you create the environment. How does it feel? What's the emotional level of getting what you want, of living that life that you envision? What does that feel like emotionally? How am I going to feel when I have the money to do whatever I want to do? How's that going to feel? What does that look like?
Curiously enough, that actually can be tough to do.
It's incredibly tough to do because there's no point of reference, and for a lot of people, or you see it on TV, like the idea that okay, I'm going to just go write a check for a brand new Lamborghini. That's what I'll do.
Yeah.
Well, that's not necessarily, first of all, how that would feel. You don't have a point of reference of writing a $387,000 check for a car feels like. So you can't create that, but you can create.
Well, I mean, you can go through the motions. You could actually write a check that you're not actually going to spend on it. But now you've got the problem of, do you believe what you wrote?
Right. Well, and that's where it comes from. You can write a three, as the term he used, a $3 kabillion check.
How's that spelled anyway?
Exactly. But if you don't believe that $3 kabillion check has any value, it doesn't have any value in the developing of things.
That's right.
So this is a process of accepting what you really can believe and sort of increasing as you start to have little things happen. Then you can start to have more. It's like exercise in a sense. The more, when you start out lifting weights, you can't lift that much, but as you increase your intensity, you're able to increase more. As you learn to create more in your life, you start to believe, and then you realize the number doesn't matter. If you're saying, I want more money in my life, and you don't understand why you're not getting more money in your life, well, you probably stepped over $1 or $2 on the ground today. That was more money in your life. You brought that in your life, but versus the idea of it's more than that, and so the creation piece is my current ongoing understanding, and how the brain really starts creating the environment for it to happen when you start creating the feeling, the emotion that really works.
You're talking about the $1 or $2 that was on the ground that you didn't pick up. Interesting point about that is that, you could look at that as, well, that's what I attracted, I'm done. Or you can also look at it as, hey, there's $1 or $2 on the ground, I think I would take it. Where's the next two?
Well, and that's how I view it. I mean, I pick up every penny or every dime. And I'll often put it in change jars or tip jars or something along those lines. But I pick up every one and give value to I'm appreciative for every penny that comes into my life, and that creates more and more of money coming into my life, and I believe that. So that's part of the creation process. So when you see a penny on the ground, pick it up, be thankful for it, and put a handful of change in a tip jar someday.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
That's spending it or giving it in the support of others is a really good idea. But the trip was, again, part of an awakening process for me that just seems to. I'm almost excited to see what is next. Because
that is the goal right there, to be excited about what's next.
Yeah, because I keep discovering these next level of things, and it's just such a. You'll run across this one person or this one guru, and it's stuff that I probably couldn't have handled in the beginning. I needed, you can't skip kindergarten and go into, third year brain surgery school, at medical school. You can't go there. You have to start at kindergarten and work your way up before you can understand the concepts of medical school.
Doesn't mean that it has to take a year each time, but you do have to work through each of the steps.
You have to work through each of the steps. I'm looking in amazement of this young Asian man that he lives in California, and he was on TV. He's 11 years old, and he will be graduating medical school at 15.
Wow.
Where they're estimating it. And the point was, he's helping the other grown kids, so to speak, the 28-year-olds.
Right.
He's helping them with the concepts of some of the work, and but he's still an 11-year-old boy. He's taking it they're giving it to him as fast as he can take it, and it's amazing.
It's the Good Will Hunting syndrome.
Exactly, and he will. So the exciting piece about all this, Walt, that as we make these discoveries and as each personal journey goes through this, you start to realize there's really nothing that is there. Again, the only limit is within us. Now, that's hard to accept, but once you start to really believe that the only limitations exist are existing within us, then the effort and energy to free up those limitations becomes an exciting challenge.
It's actually gotten long past the point where I've had to accept that. I've accepted it for the longest time. For me, the bigger challenge was letting myself believe I could get past it and not be stuck there.
Right. Well, it's so important to understand what gets us stuck, and a lot of it is preconceived ideas. I have a friend down in Florida that I was visiting, and this is a very boring topic to most people, but we were talking about, my belief system. I'm an addictions. One of my jobs is I do addictions counseling. I'm a recovering compulsive gambler, and I work with other people with all different types of addictions. So I have a belief system that is not limited to any one type of treatment or modality. I believe that you got to come at it from whatever angle the person is able to handle of that.
That's true.
And this gentleman is a very old school AA person. And
a little resistant, shall we say?
Yes. And so, he said, I'm frustrated with you because you won't totally embrace the 12 steps. And I said, well, first of all, I use the 12 steps to find my recovery, and I think they're an excellent tool when used correctly. I said, but when they're used incorrectly, they're actually using the law of attraction against the person in recovery. And the idea that he would get so frustrated with that, and as I tried to explain it to him, he had a default set of programming that I did not want to become frustrated with, and I just said, look, it works for you, and I'm not going to discuss this anymore. He didn't like the fact I wasn't going to discuss it anymore because he didn't. I realized I wasn't going to change his mind. He couldn't quite figure out that he wasn't going to change mine at that point,
or didn't want to believe it.
Or didn't want to believe it, yes. And but my point behind saying that is what gets a lot of people stuck are these belief systems that are so entrenched, and it's usually not the resistance to what you're really seeking, but there's these underlying belief systems that you don't even know exist within you.
Yeah, and those are resistance. They are different forms of resistance, and you're right, they get completely in the way in ways that we don't even realize.
That's the point. Yes, the obvious stuff is easy to see. It's the hidden stuff you don't realize.
It's like the old cliche, not the cliche, the motto of the Seabees. The Seabees, the construction brigade of the military, they go in and they'll set up the bases and so forth. Their motto was, "The difficult we do immediately, the impossible takes a little longer."
Right, right. I love that.
Which is a wonderful motto to have. And,
yes.
and buried in that motto are two things. First of all, what we've been talking about, that people get stuck on the idea of difficult things, making things difficult because they didn't realize that by doing so they were making their own lives difficult. They thought of it as just something unrelated to what they're trying to do, achieving their goals. It's just they're two separate topics. What are you talking about?
Right.
And then the impossible part is when somebody proposes to them, like you did, that there is this thing going on where they're creating resistance, and that they need to step away from that. That becomes impossible to consider.
Right, and the idea. A lot of times you'll see this with people in religion. They become they're so incredibly stuck in their religious beliefs that they're not freed up by. They're unable to free up the thought to allow something else in there, so they get stuck. In my mind, I think the point of what the original point of a religion should be of helping someone grow and become free, they become trapped in the religion itself and not able to see the stuff you're intended to see.
There's an interesting similarity among all religions and people who are practitioners of those religions. As far as I can see, every religion seems to have people like this. In which there are people who, within the religion, will describe themselves as being true Christians or true Muslims or true Buddhists or true Hindus or whatever, and people who disagree with them are false.
Right.
They could be practitioners of the same religion, but because they don't share the exact same canonical beliefs, therefore, I'm right and you're wrong.
Well, a great example of that is a lot of. I was brought up and remain a recovering Southern Baptist.
You recover from a lot of things.
yeah. That's the first thing I had to recover from. But what happens is, I don't know if I'm sure most of our audience has heard of Joel Osteen.
Oh yeah.
He's a Christian preacher, but he is very much a law of attraction. I don't know if he calls himself this, but he's very much talks about what we talk about.
He's certainly in favor of positive messages. There's no doubt about that.
Positive message, absolutely. Well, Well, I think that's a wonderful way to deliver that message, and it's a very palatable message for many people.
Mm-hmm.
The Southern Baptists call him a Christian light,
Yeah.
or
Paleo-Christian.
Yeah, just a very very derogatory, because he doesn't hammer home the fire and brimstone, you will burn in hell if you don't believe this exact way message.
Right.
It bothers them when in reality the general Christian message has been, if you accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, you will go to heaven. Period. That doesn't sell well. That doesn't feel that doesn't have a lot of oomph to people. So we got to add these other things to it.
Well, the people it doesn't have oomph to are the people who have control issues.
Well, right.
Really, when it comes down to it, they want to control people into the religion, because that way they feel like they have control over people.
Right. Well,
which is completely nothing to do with the beliefs. It just has to do with who they are.
Right. Well, and even though when people say, yeah, I believe in Jesus and he's my Savior. Oh, but you're not believing the right way.
The right way, yeah.
It's like, well, how? There's only really one message here, but you're wanting to add all the other stuff to it. So it becomes its own thing that becomes amazingly blocking in life. And I'm not just picking on religion, but it could be, I know people with addictive behaviors. I know people in their jobs that, I always tell someone, if you tell me you know everything there is to know about anything, I immediately go, okay, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Because it's not I'm unaware of anything. I have a dear friend who is a very well-known psychiatrist, Dr. Sherman Master. He has been around. He's 80, I don't know, he's in his 80s. Let's do that. Very active, still maintains a vibrant practice. We share an office suite. An incredible man. And one of the greatest attributes of this doctor, he's one of the top 50 psychiatrists in the world. He's really a great guy. Is he often says, I don't know.
That is good.
I love that. He's the only doctor I've ever heard say, I don't know. Most of them will ramble on about something. They have no idea, because they're doctors. They think they have the right answer. He says, I don't know. Here's what the literature says, but it doesn't make sense to me. Here's where we're at. So he's very open to about anything. And one of my goals, the role model that he is for me, even though we're in similar but different professions, I want to be open-minded. I want to look at all things. If I'm in Richmond, Virginia, as we speak. If I say to you, Walt, I want to meet you at 5300 Peachtree Street in Atlanta, Georgia, at 5 tomorrow. I don't care how you get there, Walt. It's your business. Get there. If we're going to meet, get there. There's 100 ways you could be there by 5 tomorrow. I don't care how you do it. Well, that's the goal for me. I want to be that person that let's get to where we're going. Mm. I'm not going to control the way you do it.
Right.
Now, Walt, you must go get on a train.
Yeah.
Then go here, go there, or you must go get on a plane, or you must drive here.
If you don't go by Amtrak, there's something wrong with you.
Right. and that's sort of the piece of where you're at in your life. If we can let go of outcomes and stuck on ways of thinking. One of the trainings that as you know, I work with foster care kids and foster care parents. And one young lady several years ago, she wanted to be a foster mom. She was a single lady, a very bright professor type. And I was trying to explain to her as we were doing the training, I said, you have to be prepared. She was trying to name every scenario that can happen. I said, we could rehearse every scenario that when you get – we didn't even know what kids she was going to be getting. So that whatever rehearsal we do, we can look at ways to handle things, but you're not going to figure out what happens until it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be stuck on any one thing. And so the first thing she said is, well, I have certain rules that have to be adhered to. The child has to be in bed by 9:30. The child has to be here. And I said, well, right off the bat, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the idea that, some of these kids come in so highly medicated. it's not reasonable for them to lay down and be in bed at 9:30. Now, they could maybe start winding down at 9 and they might fall asleep at 10 or 10:30, but you're not going to automatically just dictate that every child is going to be in bed at 9:30. That's not reasonable.
Well, you can dictate it. It just doesn't mean that people are going to follow your dictation. That's all.
Right. Well, and you have to get to the point, like she's like, well, and we're only going to eat organic food in my house. And I said, well, that's a wonderful, I said, I'm on board with that. However, trust me, until when you become a parent, you'll adapt and do whatever you have to do.
Right.
When my son TJ first came into my care, he was in foster care, and I think for the first month he ate 4 or 5 peanut butter sandwiches 3 or 4 times a day.
Wow, yeah.
And I'm like,
which sounds like a young teen.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. Eventually, but in the beginning, that's what he was comfortable. You know, we meeting the law of attraction where we're at, and where instead of trying to force our stuff into it, developing what we're trying to seek and allowing it to happen is a huge challenge for so many people.
It's interesting that we're talking about this concept right here, because just a few days ago, September 2nd, Friday, September 2nd, Abraham Hicks, they sent out those daily emails. Listen to the email he sent out that day. It was actually from a session in 2005, but it's so apropos to what we're talking about. It says, everyone thinks they're right. So the question isn't who's right or who's wrong. The question is who is most in alignment with their source, and who is the most allowing, and whose life is really going the best most of the time. And boy, that really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
It's exactly what we're talking about.
Because now it's no longer a question of proving that you're right, because clearly that's going to get you on the wrong path. That's basically what the message says. You don't want to focus on that. You want to focus on being in alignment with who you are.
Yes.
And when you're focusing on that most successfully, that's when stuff's going to go best for you.
Yes. And this is so imperative that we when we look at how all this works and how you eventually, one of the things I've been looking into and studying more and more and doing every day of my life is meditation and various forms of meditation. And in the beginning, I was very intimidated by meditation. I kept thinking, I'm doing it wrong. I don't understand it. Clearly, I'm not doing it right. And I would try it. It felt stupid. And
Isn't that something, though? Because I've had the exact same experience. I'm sure most people have. Because
sure.
The first time you even consider the idea, I remember the first time, I don't remember the exact situation, but I remember the feeling the first time I sat down to meditate. The feeling was, well, this is a waste of time. I mean, I hadn't even started yet.
Right. And one of the that's the amazing thing to me is one of the most difficult things is I would sit there and find my mind just going all over the place and thinking how stupid and waste of time this is. And one of the most simple meditations and probably the most effective is concentrating on your breathing, knowing that your mind is going to, especially early and as this process begins, it's going to wander away every 3 seconds and just keep bringing it back and just focusing on your breathing.
It took 3 seconds?
I
mean, for me, it's a lot quicker than that.
Yeah. And eventually you'll find, okay, I can go a minute or two without my mind wandering. And then eventually and that's the point of meditation is to allow yourself to cut out all the external things that are driving and resetting your brain. That's what I try to do.
The other thing I learned is you don't have to be perfect at it.
No, it doesn't. I've been doing meditation with several of the people that are open in my practice to doing it. You know, the younger people tend to not even remotely want to talk about it. But my older clients generally like it. But I'll tell them in the beginning, they say, well, I can't be doing it right. And I go, you can't be doing it wrong. That's
True.
The beauty of it.
Yes,
you can't
good point. I love that.
You sit down and eat. Just the idea of sitting down, trying to start the process is meditation unto itself.
It is. And once I realized that was true, then I felt different about meditation. I still don't actually do it a lot, but now I can meditate without feeling like I'm screwing up or something.
Right. You can't screw it up. It is foolproof. You can't. And the idea of once you can accept that, then you get into a really, really good pattern. I probably, with my trip traveling a lot, I was in a hotel room, so I actually had plenty of time, and I would sit on the floor of the hotel room, which, probably not a good idea and for a lot of reasons, but it was a Hilton, so I have to assume they vacuumed occasionally.
I would hope so, yes.
Yeah, and I would sit on the floor, and I would meditate 10 or 15 minutes every day when I get going. And again, it was part of my process. When I was on the bench, I tried to meditate while I was on the bench. It was harder to do on the bench with all the birds, and that's such a amazing thing. But I tried while I was there, and it's such a wonderful way of self-care and of tuning in to where the process of using the law of attraction comes from a very peaceful place within inside of you, very emotionally positive place, and that's a great way to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of the many ways that we can get there, and it can be very, very effective. It's not the only way, of course, but
no.
It's, for anyone who finds that it helps even remotely, it's worth doing.
Well, in studies, I posted something on Facebook the other day that mindfulness meditation, which is basically just listening to your heartbeat or your breathing, just like we talked about, being aware of yourself, is more effective for people who do it consistently at dealing with anxiety than any of the drugs that they use for anxiety. And
that doesn't surprise me at all, because to be perfectly honest, I mean, I don't take any kind of drugs like that for anxiety, and I never, ever would. I mean, if a doctor prescribed it and strapped me down, I'd be protesting every step of the way. I just would not want to even consider that route. But from what little experience that I have with any kind of medication like that to me would actually make it more stressful.
Oh, when we mentioned earlier about me dealing with the death of my son in 2014, so most of my friends are counselors or doctors or something. So I have one of my friends left me a voice message, and he's a doctor, and he said, I called in 5 days of Xanax for you. And he meant truly a very kind act.
Yeah, he meant well.
He meant well. He said, that'll help you sleep. And so I talked to him a couple of days later, and I said, I really appreciate that. I said, but I forget the word, how we got there. But he said, did you get that filled? And I said, no, I would never take those. And he said, oh, I didn't mean to insult you. I said, no, you didn't insult me. It's very kind to think of me. I said, but I know I needed to feel this. I know it's part of what I needed to do. And if I medicate away from that, I'm actually robbing myself of the process. And I don't want to be mood altered. I want to feel it. It was horrible, but at the same time, I was able to come through it. And if I quickly, as you remember, we talked shortly after all that, I was quickly able to get to a place of joy and gratitude about my son TJ's life. And I don't think if I would have taken medication, I could have used that process. That would not have helped speed that process up.
I think it would have slowed it down.
Absolutely.
I really don't have any doubt about that. And it reminds me of the conversation I had with my wife just a couple months ago. She lost her stepmother, which was an interesting story in itself, because when her stepmother first came into my wife's life many, many years ago, my wife's natural-born mother died when she was like 21 or something like that, so pretty young in her life. Not totally young, but young enough. And then Ruth, her stepmother, came in a few years later. I'm not sure exactly what the time frame is. But the point is that when Ruth first came into Louise's life, Ruth was really rather mean to Louise, to my wife, and they did not have a good relationship. Over time, that changed dramatically, to the point that when Ruth died, it was a huge emotional event in my wife's life. And in fact, we got a chance that many people don't get. We actually got a chance to go visit with her just a couple days before she died and said goodbyes and the whole thing. Well, afterward, Louise did pretty well. I mean, Louise is like you. She's also a former therapist, and she has that background, so that helps her some. But she still has to deal with this stuff, right? And I think I told you this story about how there was one particular day where I could just see it starting to bubble up in her, and she was really, really struggling. So I just went over and sat with her, sat in front of her. She was sitting on, we have a sectional couch. She was sitting in the corner there. So there's like two sections of couches going off 90-degree angles, and so I kind of sat down on the floor in front of her, in where the two sections join there. So kind of like sitting at her feet in a sense, and I just took her hands, looked her in the eye, and said, there's a question I never asked you before. What is it that you love the most about Ruth? And it was a fascinating thing because I think I told you this before. All of a sudden, her demeanor changed, her way of thinking about Ruth changed, and she was just amazed at the transition. That basically the question took her out of the grief range and put her back into the love range. Well, there's no way that a drug's going to do that. No. The drug's going to work in the opposite direction of that. It can't do that. So anybody who proposes the idea that a drug is going to help you to get to a better place, they really aren't paying attention to how the human psyche works.
Well, that's what you've nailed is it's about the perception of positive and negative that we talk about frequently, and it's hard to understand when people say this because people who are grieving, everybody has to grieve their own way, and I don't judge anyone how they do anything. Yeah. But the truth is we're built in, our bodies and minds and our spirit is all together is really intended to deal with all of these things. Mm-hmm. And see, I'm a believer, and of one of the reasons I don't get a flu vaccine every year. I think it's healthy for your body to occasionally get the flu and then fight it off.
Oh,
I believe that.
Yeah.
And I'm not giving medical advice. I'm speaking strictly for me. And I'm not an anti-vaccine guy. I think polio was cured by vaccine. I think it's brilliant that vaccines can be very, very effective. But a flu vaccine is stopping a normal, a flu coming up every year. I had the last time I took a flu vaccine was about 20 years ago now. And ironically, the last time I had the flu was 2 weeks after I had that flu vaccine.
Of course.
And of course, doctors tell me that has no connection. And I say, absolutely, I agree with you. I'm just letting you know facts. I've not had the flu in 20 years. And I haven't had a flu vaccine in 20 years. So it's sort of the same thing to me with emotional stuff. There's an old recovery saying, and I don't know who said it. It's probably not even a recovery saying, but the best way out is through. And for me, through the grief was, instead of avoiding the emotion of the grief, I wanted to go through it. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to comprehend it. And then I could get to the point, once I went through it, then I could choose the emotion that I wanted to apply to my son in his life. And the void created was huge. But the joy created was even huge. It was much larger. And that's where I chose and continue to choose to place my energy. I have pictures that I post on Facebook. My favorite pictures of TJ. They're really when he was probably between 13 and 15. He was very happy, great time of his life. He was always smiling. It was before he hit the really cool stage where he had all the frowns pictures, And to me, I post the pictures of him showing pure joy. There's one of him holding a puppy and a huge smile on his face. That's joy to me. And that's where I live with my memory of TJ.
Absolutely. It is the place to live.
It is. And so there are people that get stuck in and choose to live in the void that exists because of the death of a loved one.
I mean, you just described two different ways that you could look at TJ, because like you said, later on in his life, he got into that frown stage. And you could choose to focus on that. You could say, that's the TJ I remember. He was frowning all the time. I mean, you wouldn't do that consciously, I don't think. But no. It's possible for a person to say, that's what I remember about this person.
Yeah.
Well, yes. Two interesting things there. First of all, it was a choice, wasn't it? You got to choose which of those two options you were going to go with. Were you going to go with the happy TJ, or were you going to go with the sad TJ?
Yes.
That's a key point. That's like, hey, here's where the freedom comes from. Here's where the power comes from. We actually get to choose. Isn't that cool?
Well, and the beauty of it is like most teenagers, probably from 16 until 18 or 19, he had a very rough period, and he had to deal with a lot of stuff. But he was, the last couple of years of his life was amazingly positive and smiling and happy, and he was back to that person again. And so again, I'm able to remember. It isn't that I'm remembering him falsely. I'm remembering him in a way that brings joy to my life. And there's a big difference with that, and that compared to the void that I could focus on, and that's what people do. It's not just with that; it's with other things. When you by medicating, like with the drugs, medicating away from anxiety or stuff. To me, it's about feeling it, and we got on the subject by talking about meditation. It's about learning about it. What is the point of anxiety? The body wouldn't have anxiety unless there was a point. So understand the point, feel it. Move on, process it. Don't get stuck in it. Don't medicate away from it. And this is where the law of attraction.
That's the key point right
us.
there. Medicating keeps you stuck in it. That's the key point.
It does. I had gallbladder surgery a few years ago. I don't know, probably 5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, I went in with the attitude, this is a very quick procedure. I'm in and out. Well, they want you to spend the night, but the doctor wheeled me in right after surgery. I sit up and I said, okay, can I get dressed and go? And he laughed and he goes, no, you gotta. He said, I'll make a deal with you. When you could walk around the entire top floor or the floor of the hospital, I'll let you home. I put on my shoes and walked around the floor of the hospital. And he goes, that's not what I meant. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a Friday, and I knew that if I didn't go home that day, I was going to be there all weekend.
So you didn't do it by the proper rules. So what were the proper rules?
Right, exactly. So I sat down, and he said, all you got to do is press the button for medication. And I said, I'm not going to take any of the medications. He goes, don't be tough. I go, it's not being tough. It's not about me being tough. I believe pain exists for a reason. I believe it helps speed up the healing process. I believe all that. I'm viewing the pain as my body healing at a rapid pace. And he just rolls his eyes and walks out. So next, not in my room, this hospital, everything's a private room, but next to my room is another man 5 years younger than me who had his gallbladder out. And he was whiny and moany and complaining about all the pain he was in. And they were medicating him at every turn. And he's like, oh, do you believe how painful this is? And I go, it's really not that bad. I mean, it's not that bad. I mean, it doesn't feel pleasant, but it's not that bad. And he just thought, okay, this guy's crazy. And
what you were really saying to him was, I choose not to let it be debilitating.
Right. So finally, about 4:30, after about my 9th call to the doctor, he said, just go home. Just go home. He said, if you start bleeding or something, please go to another hospital. He was joking. He said, follow up with me in 2 weeks. I never went back and followed up with him. I went home, had a normal life. He said, wait a week before you drive. I did. I had somebody drive me around for a little while. Then I said, this is stupid. I'm fine. And I left my charger in the hospital, so I went back the following Monday to pick up my charger.
For your cell phone?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the man that was in the hospital next to me was still there. And he said, well, they say I might be able to get out in a couple of days. I'm like, I really hope you do, buddy. I really do. Mm. And he said, I just don't understand how you're, and I'm wearing regular clothes and walking normally. It's just not,
right. It's not like you're limping around here.
No. And he just was amazed that we just had the same procedure.
Right.
And
but you didn't have the same experience of it.
Right. And it's that way with life and grief and things that happen. What are you going to do with it? That's the answer.
Just the other day, we rewatched a movie that we've enjoyed watching in the past. I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's the remake of I can't remember what the old movie is either. It's the story of Anna Leonowens, the woman who teaches the King of Siam. King and I. That was the original one, and the latest one, I can't remember what the latest one's called. Jodie Foster starred in the leading role in that one. But anyway, at one point during the movie, I guess it's the Prime Minister to the King, says to Anna, Buddhists believe that life is suffering. And it made me think about how you've talked about the story of the Polish guy who insisted that the Poles have not suffered. They've endured pain, but they've never suffered. I thought, wow, there's an example of how a religious tenet needs to be updated with modern sensibility, because it really sends the wrong message now. I know what the original intent of the message was, but that's not the message it's sending right now.
Well, and I think one of our biggest problems in society, not getting into political or sociological discussions that nobody's going to agree on, but one of our biggest problems is the role of victimhood is sold to us as let's figure out a way to be offended. I
love that. Let's figure out a way to be offended.
Yeah.
Boy, is that something that people spend a lot of time on? Absolutely.
Right. By the time, the current thing that as you know, on a news blackout, I haven't been paying attention to the news. However, I do watch sports, and one thing I cannot avoid, which is angering me on some level that I need to let go of, is I'm aware there's a pro football player right now that is not standing during the national anthem.
Oh yeah, big controversy.
And so everybody's screaming and hollering about he needs to leave our country and I'm like, oh my goodness, why? I'm trying to get away from this stuff.
Yeah, right. It's deliberately intruding on your life, right?
Right. And so one of the things that was so clear that I did pick up on it was a positive message. There's a gentleman, he's a World War, maybe a Korean War veteran, that a Purple Heart guy, older gentleman, and everybody is pretty much saying all these things about what needs to happen to this guy. And this older gentleman said, he said, I shed blood for his right to not stand up.
Very nicely said.
That is awesome. I am not taking sides, but I thought that was such a great perspective. He said, everybody's screaming. He said, we need to celebrate the fact he doesn't have to stand up. The fact he doesn't want to, that's on him. But the fact that he has a right to, there's countries that North Korea, you can get killed for not clapping when the supreme leader walks by. They've executed children who cried in his presence. Here, we get all in arms because the man didn't stand during the national anthem, and he has the right not to do that. There's
a classic example of what we were talking about earlier. The people who get so bent out of shape out of this, they're right. They're right.
Right.
And as we pointed out earlier, it's not about being right. Being right actually doesn't make you happier. It doesn't give you a better life. Being right actually makes you less happy and gives you a worse life because you're focusing on the wrong stuff.
Well, you're getting stuck on the stuff that just doesn't matter. And what they're unintentionally doing, if everybody were to ignore this gentleman and not give him the publicity, we wouldn't even know what's going on, but it's just drawing a lot of attention.
It's really about trying to keep building that negative spiral.
Yes, and that's what happens. One of the most interesting things, especially in the age of social media, is any attention is what you're after. You want to be trending. That's what Hollywood people want to do. They want to be trending,
right?
And when
notice how they never actually state they want to trend up.
Right.
That part really intrigues me. But you're right. They all want to trend.
They want to trend. And there's a very liberal Hollywood producer, and he made a statement of a very direct. It was about an American war hero, and he made a statement about this person, and it was perceived as derogatory. Well, everybody was posting pictures of this director and saying all this stuff, and my response was, if nobody quoted him and he got no attention, he shuts up. But yet, giving him the attention is what he was seeking in the first place.
Right.
And so it's a different world we live in, and everybody's, we need to kick him out of the country. We need to do this. We need to do this. And
isn't it interesting? The thing that is right is to not focus on what's right.
Right. Exactly.
That's pretty wild.
It is. And so within our own, taking it back to within our own lives, part of this discovery that has just been so amazing to me is the judgment. One of the things that one of my speakers was talking this week that I need to start taking notes of who says what, but he said what gets stuck is when you're trying to create these things in your life, you need to do it without the judgment of it. The judgment attached to it is what keeps a lot of us stuck.
And let's be perfectly honest, it's so easy to do. I mean, we're conditioned to do it. We have been judging all of our lives.
Yes. You have, and that was his point. You're judging everything. When you want to just truly attract it or create it, you sit there and you focus on what it would feel like, or what you think it would feel like, or what emotions would be attached to having a total abundance where money was not a factor. What would that emotion be like? That's where to live. It isn't the fact what I'm going to go buy with it. It's the fact that there will no longer be anxiety about, can I cover this bill? There will be no longer will you have to focus on the worry of stuff financially related.
And by the way, I want to touch on something too. I don't think either one of us is saying we should never judge.
Absolutely.
Because you have to judge in order to live at times. I mean, there's certain things you have to make judgments constantly. You have to make a judgment about whether to cross the street when there's a truck coming.
Absolutely.
If you don't make a judgment there, you're basically saying my life's over. I'm done.
Right. Well, it's like with anything else. Judging it is a necessary. We're going to make choices and judgments every day. We have to make thousands of them. We need to be aware of, when I was in Florida, and again, we were going through the hurricane was starting to, parts of the hurricane were starting to come aboard on shore. Well, there's this one road I'm going down, and there's no other cars there, and there's water there. And I'm in a rental car, which was a Toyota Corolla. It's not a really, deep car, so to speak. And I had to stop and go, I think that's too deep for me to drive through? Without seeing any other cars driving through, I had no idea or how to judge how deep it was.
Right.
So I turned around and went another way. That was a judgment that was very wise.
It was.
Turns out that area was about 4 feet deep. I would have sunk that car in about 2 seconds. So I made a judgment that served me well. Judgments save our lives. They keep us alive. However, but it's like with anything else, when judgments interfere with our happiness, that's where we have to start looking.
And that's where we go back to what Abraham Hicks said. They pointed out that it's not about being right, it's about being in alignment with your own true self, who you really are. If you're in alignment with your own true self, and the judgment that you make is in alignment with your own true self, then it's an appropriate judgment for you. Right. The mistake is in assuming that just because it's an appropriate judgment for you, that it's also appropriate for the guy who's next to you who has a different set of circumstances.
Well, and that's to me one of the biggest things I try to, when I will dabble in discussing politics, is very rare.
Except we seem to touch on it every other week between the two of us, but still, I understand your point.
Well, we're talking more about the concept of the politics, but versus the politics themselves. But I'm blessed to have friends all over the world. I have friends in New York City, in London. I have friends in rural Louisiana. There is no possible way could human beings be expected to grow up wealthy in New York City and relate to poor in southern Louisiana? It's impossible. It's two different worlds. They don't exist in the same orbit in some ways. So to get angry because somebody doesn't have your political view is not looking at where their judgment is based on their life and what they've been through. Or
to put it another way, when you judge based on their political view, you're basically saying you have to live your life my way.
Yes, and I have a friend in New York City that just truly doesn't understand. He said, "Well, I see these poor people. They're flooded out. Why don't they just go buy a new house and move?" And I said, "Well, that for most people, they just can't go buy a new house and move, or they don't believe they can do that. That's a whole different topic." But he said, I just don't understand that. Well, he's sitting there with, $35 million in the bank and $1 million penthouse or a $5 million penthouse. And so he doesn't have a point of reference of what that would be like. It's and nor would the person from there understand why you'd want to live in New York City and live in
I don't understand why people want to live in New York City.
I personally don't either. Great food. I'd weigh 500 pounds if I lived in New York City.
Actually, I do understand because I have dabbled enough to get a feel for it. But it is a completely different way of living, a different way of thinking, a different way of doing things. So
exactly.
Expecting me to fully appreciate everything that there is in New York City is not terribly realistic. Doesn't mean that I don't try. I have tried. I've actually made friends and I've asked them, show me your New York. I've gone to New York City to be with this friend and say, just show me what New York is to you. And they've done it, and it's a wonderful experience. I can see why they'd love it. It still isn't right for me, but I can at least begin to appreciate it. And the key point there is, it doesn't have to be right for me.
Well, and that's the individual nature that at some point we can start looking at, maybe have a topic along the lines of the uniqueness of us.
Yes,
is such an event that why it fits so perfectly with the law of attraction is when you allow your uniqueness to use the law of attraction. That's how we get such a diverse, healthy world.
Absolutely. I would urge anybody who has an urge to be right to have an urge instead to appreciate individuality. It's a much better place to be.
Well, and I tried to explain to a good friend in Florida who was basically telling me that he was very concerned for my eternal soul because
I've had a few of those.
He's been listening to me on this radio station. And he watched my Facebook post. He thinks I'm becoming too new age, and I said I really appreciate that. I do. I said
sure.
I am not concerned at all because I know what a great person you are and what your belief system is. I'm not concerned for your eternal soul, and I am very comfortable with my eternal soul.
Yeah.
So I ask that at least you believe that I am comfortable with that. He goes, well, I believe you're comfortable with it. I just think you're wrong. And I said, well, I appreciate that. I said, I'm not going to, you're wanting me to say the same thing to you, but I'm going to just trust that what you're believing is right for you.
Which is enough to kind of knock him a little bit off balance.
Right. Because he wanted me to go. He wanted to debate about all that, which I wasn't going to do. And again, it's about when you're, the need to be right is so, it is so open to interpretation when the truth is the need to be right, which is congruent with you. Does it match the truthfulness of your being? And that's a show we could do one day, which I'd love to do, about how that's why the law of attraction is so beneficial, because it isn't stuck on any one exact way of thinking or living. Your individuality is allowed to attract. That's the beauty of it all. That's what makes it so
Maybe that's what
great.
we should talk about. Maybe that should be our topic next week.
Let's do it. I love that if we remember it.
Well, I'll make a note about it.
Oh, good. That's a concept that I never would have thought of. So, but it really is. It's so amazing, Walt, and this journey has been just. I'm really thankful for you and the show and our audience, because it's such a. It's actually been a part of my growth that I didn't know was still that there was so much available out there.
Isn't that what's so great about this? Because I agree with you. This has been a wonderful trip, and I can't wait to see what the next step is, because it's going to go on for a long time. I think it's going to go on for as long as you and I are alive together.
Oh yeah, I just am so grateful that we have sort of connected, and the way we connected, it shows we were meant to connect in my mind, and the rapport that we have, and one day when this does become a radio show that's nationwide, I look forward to sharing all these experiences with our national audience. But again, it's been such a great week, and it's great to talk to you, and I appreciate those that are listening, and hope to be able to talk to everybody one day.
And thank you for sharing your experience on the bench this week, because that's your annual experience, and it is very meaningful to you. Obviously, it's the basis for your book, and so we appreciate you sharing that as well.
Thanks for the opportunity, my friend.
And we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.